Any discussion on foreign policy starts off with a fundamental question: who our adversaries are. And in India's context, the question is, who is India's adversary? Foreign policy is all about keeping the adversaries at bay while uniting with or working with the friendly nations with a strategic objective. And the strategic objective is to keep the adversaries at bay and, if possible, to defeat them. This is a critical point in time, and the current geopolitical events around the world require that the Indian government, Indian policymakers, and think tanks keep the political history in the perspective while analyzing the current geopolitical events. This would have tremendous future ramifications. Remember, world is at war. Indians must remember, Anglo-American Western Empire killed millions of Indians all over India by orchestrating famines. Indian people are aware of the loot and plunder, but they may not be aware of this unprecedented genocide and mass murder. This was an act of war, a race war. There is substantial political deception and treachery as well as part of the British Empire. In this episode of Alternative Perspective, I'm going to explain all these things with facts and figures. I'm also going to expose West's dangerous plan with India. During the Second World War, British, under the leadership of former Prime Minister and an absolute evil called Winston Churchill, orchestrated the Great Bengal Famine of 1943. Although it was referred to as Great Bengal Famine, in reality it affected entire eastern India, that is undivided Bengal, Bihar, Orissa, Assam and Tripura. Estimated death toll could be as high as 3.8 million people in Bengal alone. As per my research, estimated death toll could be as high as 6 million across entire eastern India. But that is not all. Throughout the British Raj, there were other instances of famine as well. Great Bengal Famine of 1769, Chalisa Famine 1783, Doji Bara Famine 1791, Agra, that is Uttar Pradesh Famine 1837, Orissa Famine 1866, Rajputana Famine 1868, Bihar Famine 1873, South Indian Famine lasted for 3 years, 1875 to 1878, and Great Indian Famine 1899, and I have already talked about the Great Bengal Famine of 1943. Millions died in these famines. British administration under Winston Churchill orchestrated the Great Bengal Famine of 1943, and there is absolutely no doubt about this fact. Churchill comments, "They are a beastly people with beastly religion. Famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits." That was his comment. That was the comment of the British Prime Minister, then British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. We got to remember this. Does it not constitute an act of war against the people of India? It constitutes an act of waging a war against the people of India with an intention to kill the Indians. And today I'm saying Judeo-Christian Anglo-American Western Empire will pay for this crime against the humanity. These discussions, however, are futile unless and until we find out who our real adversaries are. We need to remember, British colonized us through its East India Company, which happens to be an offshoot trading house of Anglo-Dutch banking empire. An Anglo-Dutch banking empire is controlled by the Western ruling elites. India's vast wealth and resources were plundered by the British. This vast wealth and resources were utilized in the development of British industries during 18th, 19th and 20th century. East India companies such as British East India Company, or for that matter Dutch East India Company, or for that matter French East India Company, also looted and plundered China and Indochina, that is Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos. Industrial revolution in Britain and Western countries wouldn't have happened without this loot and plunder from Asia, Africa and South America. And the ethnic communities in these places were subjugated and were pushed into abject poverty, and millions died in these places in famines orchestrated by the West. Anyone who is an ethnic citizen of these places from Laos on east up until Afghanistan on west and thinks that Britain and United States of America are our friends, then he or she must be suffering from memory loss and psychological aberration called cognitive dissonance. We need to remember, the British Empire transformed into the American Empire, that is Pax Britannica, got transformed or metamorphosed into the Pax Americana following the Second World War. So the American Empire essentially is the continuation of the British Empire. India's partition is a direct consequence of British-American conspiracy. British intelligence orchestrated riots all over India, particularly along the fault lines in Punjab and Bengal. Millions perished in this process, and now look what Winston Churchill commented on India's partition. Well, if our poor troops have to be kept in a sweltering, syphilitic climate for the sake of your precious unity, I would rather see them have a good civil war. So, basically, Britain orchestrated a civil war during India's partition. So, you understand who was behind this carnage. Question, is it not a heinous crime against the humanity? In between 1969 and 1971, Bengalis in East Pakistan were persecuted and slaughtered by the Pakistani army. More than 3 million Bengalis were murdered. It was a genocide of massive proportion. Over 1 million women got raped. It was an unprecedented crime against the humanity. It finally ended with a war between India and Pakistan in 1971, which India won handsomely with help from Russia. It was a decisive victory for India, and Pakistan was cut into two and Bangladesh was liberated. Throughout those dark days, Pakistan continued to enjoy the patronage of United States of America, Britain, and the combined West. In fact, United States of America and Britain orchestrated the genocide of Bengalis in East Pakistan through the involvement of Pakistani army. West remained silent and continued to support this crime against humanity, and finally, when the war broke out between India and Pakistan, and once they found that Pakistan was losing, United States of America and Britain ended up sending carrier battle groups to threaten India. Russians saved the day and prevented a catastrophe. Who scripted these crimes against humanity? Henry Kissinger, a Jewish German refugee turned America's 8th national security advisor and an open advocate of political Zionism. In order to avenge the strategic defeats in Vietnam War and in Bangladesh War in 1971, United States of America and Britain came up with a sinister plan to destabilize India, USSR, and Iran through proxy war and terrorism. This entire project was planned and managed by Henry Kissinger and his disciple Zbigniew Brzezinski, the 10th National Security Advisor of United States of America. Groundwork started in 1971, and in 1973, King of Afghanistan Muhammad Zahid Shah was removed in a coup. In 1977, American intelligence orchestrated yet another coup, this time in Pakistan, and American stooge called Muhammad Ziaul Haq was instated as Pakistani president. Zia would start the radicalization of the Pakistani society, and under Zia, Pakistan would become a de facto US base for waging a proxy war against India in one hand and USSR on the other hand. United States of America spreads a big lie that their support for Taliban was in response to Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which started in 1979. But in reality, Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979 in response to the US-Britain-Pak activities in Afghanistan, which was perceived by the USSR as a threat. Kindly watch a video clip from 1979. You'd see America's 10th National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski brainwashing rather simple Afghan tribal men along Pakistan-Afghanistan border near Khyber Pass. And all this happened in 1979. Kindly watch.
US National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again, because your cause is right and God is on your side.
The purpose of coordinating with the Pakistanis will be to make the Soviets bleed for as much and as long.
Anglo-American empire zeroed in on Afghanistan because of its geostrategic significance. There was a sinister plan behind this move. Anglo-American empire understood that if they could control Afghanistan, it would be possible for them to get a foothold in Central Asia and Eurasia, destabilize USSR, that is former Soviet Russia, destabilize and disintegrate India through Pakistan-sponsored terrorism and proxy war, and keep Iran at its toes. In Asia-Eurasian region, their main objective was to destabilize USSR by influencing the Muslim-dominated states of former Soviet Russia, such as Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan. Their ultimate aim was to disintegrate Soviet Russia in one hand and disintegrate India on the other hand through Pakistan-sponsored proxy war and terrorism. Groundwork started in 1971, right after America's defeat in Vietnam War and American proxy Pakistan's defeat in 1971 Indo-Pakistan War. In an American and British intelligence-led operation, King of Afghanistan, Muhammad Zahid Shah, was removed in 1973 in a bloodless coup. In 1977, American and British intelligence would help a radical called Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq to stage a coup in Pakistan. Zia would declare martial law and would become the president of Pakistan in 1977, and eventually Zulfikar Ali Bhutto would get hanged. Radicalization of societies in Afghanistan and Pakistan would continue throughout 1970s and would pick up pace once Zia became Pakistan's president. Under Zia, Pakistan would become a de facto US-based and Anglo-American empire would wage a proxy war against USSR in one hand and India on the other hand. Zia would appoint a Pakistani army general called Hamid Gul and would mobilize Pakistan's army and intelligence assets in support of American and British activities in Afghanistan. United States of America and Britain spreads a big lie that their support to Mujahideens and Taliban was in response to Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This is a total lie, bullshit. But in reality, it is the other way around. Soviet invasion was aimed to throttle US-Pak activities in Afghanistan and to prevent their backyard from turning into a safe haven for the terrorist activities. And I have categorically demonstrated this with chronology of events. It was the American establishment and more specifically American national security apparatus that funded, armed, trained and raised Taliban and later Al-Qaeda. It was the American National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski who radicalized and brainwashed rather simple Afghan tribal men and pushed these people into a never-ending war which continues even today. Pakistan would channelize American, British and Western funding, weapon systems, arms ammunition, logistics, training and Western intelligence in terrorism and proxy war against India. And that was the plan from the very beginning. Soviet Russia got economically crippled and in this process it got disintegrated. India suffered a staggering loss of lives, both civilian lives as well as the lives of our security personnel or security forces were lost. And in this process, India's public exchequer got drained throughout 90s, which retarded India's overall development and progress. So who plotted all these things? Combined West, led by United States of America and Britain. Therefore, it is Zbigniew Brzezinski, a Polish Jew turned America's 10th National Security Advisor, who should be credited with the title Father of Terrorism. And if Brzezinski is credited with the title Father of Terrorism, then his mentor, Henry Kissinger, America's 8th National Security Advisor, who should be credited with the title Grandfather of Terrorism. Thus, according to me, America's eighth national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, should be credited with the title of grandfather of terrorism, and his disciple, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the 10th national security advisor of the United States of America, who should be credited with the title father of terrorism. In 1997, in the aftermath of the disintegration of USSR, Zbigniew Brzezinski published his book, The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives. In this book, Brzezinski celebrated what United States of America has achieved in the Eurasian region. Brzezinski writes, and I quote, "America is now the only global superpower, and Eurasia is globe's central arena. Hence, what happens to the distribution of power in the Eurasian continent will be of decisive importance to America's global primacy and America's historical legacy." He continues, "The most immediate task is to make certain that no state or no combination of states gains the capacity to expel United States of America from Eurasia or even diminish significantly its decisive arbitration role." That's what he wrote. However, in the late 90s and in between 2000 to 2010 timeframe, many developing nations, the second and third world countries, would make giant strides and make rapid progress economically and in terms of science and technology. It is undeniable that India made rapid progress economically and scientifically by 2010. China made massive strides forward. Russia under Vladimir Putin went from strength to strength. This unnerved the ruling elites of Anglo-American hegemony. They feared that their unipolar world order would soon be challenged and the rule-based world order would be questioned. Now, this rule-based world order is something which the Anglo-American Judeo-Christian Western hegemony they propose. That is, they themselves would set the rules of the game and others would have to follow these rules set by them. Rule and law are not same. Law is universal and rule is set by someone or some entity or some country. So they want to set the rules of the game and everyone else will have to follow the rules set by them, and that is what is meant by rule-based world order, and they propose that. They feared a multipolar world would soon emerge. They feared an international law-driven world order would soon take precedence over the rule-based world order of the Anglo-American world. That is, they feared global political awakening. Let's now listen to Zbigniew Brzezinski, what he had to say in Council of Foreign Relations, that is CFR meeting in Montreal, Canada, way back in 2010. He clearly feared this global political awakening. Let's listen.
Let me begin by making just a thumbnail definition of the geopolitical context in which we all find ourselves, including America. And in my perspective, that geopolitical context is very much defined by two new global realities. The first is that global political leadership, by which I mean the role of certain leading powers in the world, has now become much more diversified, unlike what it was until relatively recently. Relatively recently still, the world was dominated by the Atlantic world, as it had been for many centuries. It no longer is. Today, the rise of the Far East has created a new, but much more differentiated global leadership. One which, in a nutshell, involves, if one can hazard, an arbitrary list of the primary players in the world scene: the United States, clearly, maybe next to it, but maybe the European Union. I say maybe because it is not yet a political entity. Certainly, increasingly so, and visibly so, China. Russia, mainly in one respect only, because it is a nuclear power co-equal to the United States, but otherwise very deficient in all of the major indices of what constitutes global power. Behind Russia, perhaps individually, but to a much lesser extent, Germany, France, Great Britain. Japan, certainly, although it does not have a politically assertive posture. India is rising. And then in the background of that, we have the new entity of G20, a much more diversified global leadership, lacking internal unity, with many of its members in bilateral antagonisms. That makes the context much more complicated. The other major change in international affairs is that for the first time in all of human history, mankind is politically awakened. That's a total new reality. Total new reality. It has not been so for most of human history until the last 100 years. And in the course of the last 100 years, the whole world has become politically awakened. And no matter where you go, politics is a matter of social engagement, and most people know what is generally going on in the world, and are consciously aware of global iniquities, inequalities, lack of respect, exploitation. Mankind is now politically awakened and stirring. The combination of the two, a diversified global leadership, politically awakened masses, makes a much more difficult context for any major power, including currently the leading world power, the United States.
And hence, pandemic, which is basically a plandemic, a well-planned, well-rehearsed event that was set into motion in 2012. An enlightened viewer might raise an important question here. Is this pandemic a case of asymmetric hybrid warfare that comprised of information or propaganda warfare, psychological warfare, economic warfare, and last but not the least, a full-blown biological warfare designed to cripple the economies of the second and third world nations? So, what is West's game plan in India now that war cloud is looming large on the horizon? United States of America, Britain, and the combined West wants India to join West in its fight with Russia, China, and Iran. In simple terms, West wants Indian armed forces to join hands with the combined armed forces of the West, led by United States of America, Britain, in its fight with Russia and China. West wants to use India's vast natural and mineral resources, India's huge manpower, its scientists, technologists, and engineers to support its war efforts against Russia and China and Iran. United States of America, Britain, and the combined West wants a promise from the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and its cabinet. If Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes such a promise, makes such a commitment to the United States of America and Britain, I am absolutely sure that USA and Britain would declare a full-blown war against Russian Federation tomorrow. But till now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi hasn't made such a commitment. It is the Western intelligence that played a pivotal role in the emergence of Narendra Modi as a leader and the Prime Minister in 2014 and 2019. This cannot be denied. West played a part in building Narendra Modi's persona, Narendra Modi as a phenomenon. And it helped Narendra Modi to win elections in 2014 and 2019, and there is absolutely no doubt about that. Western intelligence-backed propaganda media has created Narendra Modi's persona and constructed a phenomenon called Narendra Modi. Ever since Narendra Modi became Prime Minister in 2014, Western leaders kept on doing Narendra Modi's ego massage. Narendra Modi favored the West with his policies, whether it is demonetization, push towards digital economy, privatization of natural institutions, signing of CATSA, etc. However, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is not willing to join a military alliance that guarantees a global military conflict and brings India into a military conflict with Russia and China and probably Iran as well. West is, of course, luring him with the prospect of India getting a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, which is, of course, a grand deception, and I'm going to prove this soon. Before the start of the First World War, British authorities in India promised Indian leaders that they would give dominion status to India once the war is over, provided India supports British war efforts in Europe through its manpower and resources. Dominion status implies self-rule or self-governance. During the First World War, Indian soldiers fought in the battlefields across Europe as part of British Indian Army against Imperial Germany, or for that matter Austro-Hungarian Empire. India suffered a staggering loss of lives. I do not want to go by the official figures. As per the reports sent to the London-based Commonwealth War Graves Commission, estimated figures of death toll could be as high as 350,000, that is 3,50,000. Apart from that, India's vast wealth and natural resources and mineral resources such as coal, iron ore, aluminium, cotton, wood, food grains, tea, coffee were plundered by the British in order to support British war efforts in Europe. That is, British exploited India's manpower and India's resources in order to win a war in Europe. However, after the First World War, British denied India of the dominion status. That is, British deceived India and exploited India's resources by luring India with the prospect of a dominion status. It is this reason why there was a spike in India's freedom movement following the First World War. This actually influenced India's first Prime Minister Pandit Nehru's foreign policy to a large extent. Nehruji was one of the proponents of non-aligned movement. British Empire deceived the Russians as well. In 1907, a tripartite agreement was signed between the British Empire, the Russian Empire, and the French. This tripartite agreement was known as Triple Entente. Triple Entente was geopolitical, military, and strategic alliance that set the stage for the First World War that would commence in 1940. Triple Entente would form the nucleus of Allied power comprising of British Empire, Russian Empire, and the French. Italy and United States of America would join the Allied forces in 1915 and 1917 respectively. On the other hand, Axis power comprised of Imperial Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Ottoman Turk Empire. Bulgaria too joined the Axis forces in 1915. British and the French deceived the Russians in signing the Triple Entente by promising Tsar of Russia Nicholas II with the prospect of annexing Istanbul or Constantinople in the event of an Allied victory. This was again a grand deception. Previously, Istanbul was known as Constantinople. Constantinople was the capital of Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire. Once the Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople, its name got changed to Istanbul. So at the point of time, in 1907, Constantinople was under the Ottoman Turk Empire, and hence its name was Istanbul. During First World War, it was Russia who took most of the pain. Russia suffered the highest number of deaths and casualties. Russia had to bear with a huge loss of lives. Russian economy suffered a huge setback. Inflation and price rise was unbearable for the common Russians. However, Russian army was making good progress on the grounds. By 1917, Ottoman Turk Empire was on the verge of collapse to the much delight of the British and the French. Russian army was at the doorstep of Istanbul. Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire was locked in a trench warfare with the Russians. As the Russian army was about to take Istanbul, Bolshevik uprising would take place in Russia. Bolshevik revolution was funded by the filthy rich Judeo-Christian Zionist oligarchs settled in Britain and United States of America. Bolsheviks would overthrow Tsar of Russia Nicholas II and slaughter his entire family. Bolsheviks would impose communism in Russia, and Bolshevik also called as communist leaders such as Vladimir Lenin, or for that matter Leon Bronstein, who is more popularly known as Leon Trotsky or Trotsky, would take Russia out of the First World War. So what really happened? British and the French deceived the Russians. They promised Russia with the prospect of annexing Istanbul or Constantinople in the event of an Allied victory. They used Russia's manpower, Russia's resources, Russia's military establishment, Russian armed forces to subdue the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Imperial Germany. And then, when the crunch time came, they threw Russia in the gutter. This is what I refer to as use and throw policy of the West. Several things have influenced Narendra Modi's slight change in policies, particularly his foreign policy. Number one, Dr. S. Jaishankar's point of view on neutral foreign policy. Number two, interactions with Russian President Vladimir Putin and inputs from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Number three, Narendra Modi is not willing to blindly accept the Western narrative on climate change and green energy. This is due to his commitments for Ambanis and Adanis who are in pole position in energy sector, in conventional energy sector in India and have heavily invested in conventional energy sources. Number four, Narendra Modi has understood, at least to a certain extent, that West wants to destroy the existing industrial infrastructure of second and third world countries by compelling these countries to accept the narrative on climate change and green energy. This would make him even more unpopular as unemployment would grow. He doesn't want that. India's Foreign Secretary turned India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, is a bright exception in Narendra Modi's cabinet. In my opinion, Dr. S. Jaishankar has managed to bring Narendra Modi out of the influence of pro-Western Ajit Doval and his national security apparatus, at least in the matters of foreign policy and at least to a certain extent. By the middle of 2021, thanks to S. Jaishankar, Narendra Modi has started to understand the true nature of this pandemic. That is, essentially, it is a case of or an act of asymmetric hybrid warfare. Image-conscious Narendra Modi has understood that he might go down in the history as a total failure and a weak, worthless prime minister. He also understands that his popularity has taken a steep nosedive. Investigative journalists from Great Game India correctly points out the real motive of United States of America, Britain and the combined West. West wants to save the fledgling Western economies through the exploitation of India. I quote, as often, history makes it a habit to repeat itself. In the last 200 years, whenever the West was in trouble, East India companies or subsequent managing partners of East India companies plundered India's human and natural resources for their survival. In this great game, they kept other geopolitical players at bay. And this is exactly what is happening now. Let us summarize the whole thing. There is no doubt that Narendra Modi adopted a pro-Western foreign policy in between 2014 up until 2021, completely disregarding the fact that India's main adversaries are Britain, United States of America, Israel, and the combined West. However, of late, he has shown an inclination towards adopting a more balanced approach in the foreign policy matters. I have already stated that the authors of Great Game India have opined that the imperial and colonial powers of West still haven't given up on India and would love to plunder and loot India's vast resources in order to save their fledgling economy. Therefore, India's threat to sovereignty is quite real. This was corroborated by Russian President Vladimir Putin in a candid discussion with Prime Minister Narendra Modi way back in 2017. Vladimir Putin quite rightly thinks that the sovereignty has to be fiercely protected. Yet, it took Narendra Modi more than 4 years to understand this. You may pause this video and read these few points of Mr. Vladimir Putin. Although, in more recent times, Narendra Modi has shown an inclination to adopt a more balanced approach in foreign policy matters, I do not know how long he would be able to continue in that fashion. Already, we see that he is flip-flopping. We need to remember, Deep State has played a significant role in Narendra Modi's rise to political stardom. So will Narendra Modi be able to show the courage to dismantle the Indian Deep State, which has played a significant role in his 2014 and in 2019 victory? Will he be able to shut down all the activities of Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Clinton Foundation, or for that matter, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? After all, people say that Ajit Doval's VIF, that is Vivekananda International Foundation, or for that matter, his son's Shaurya Doval's India Foundation, is a beneficiary of some of these foundations. Will we be able to question influencers and lobbyists such as Jaggi Vasudev, Deepika Padukone, Soumya Swaminathan, or for that matter Gagandip Kang? Will he be able to question the popular narrative on this pandemic? Will he be able to take tough measures on RSS BJP faction who are spreading hate and communal tension in the society after playing polarization politics all throughout his life? I'm apprehensive. And even if he shows the willpower to do so, will the Indian deep state and the Western deep state allow him to do that? Remember, the deep state is basically a criminal syndicate and their policy is use and throw. Therefore, I am quite concerned about Narendra Modi's safety and security as well. However, I also think that Narendra Modi's alternatives within his own party, such as Nitin Gadkari, are worse than him. Also, people such as Arvind Kejriwal are far worse than him. This is my personal opinion. Also, people might talk about Ajit Doval becoming a president or prime minister. Again, I believe he would be much worse than Narendra Modi.